A really common piece of career advice is that you should dress for the job that you want. But in a world of working remotely and with the influence of tech companies on corporate culture, does the way that you dress actually really matter for your career prospects? That's what I'm going to look at in this video, and by the end of it, you should have an idea of how you should be dressing if you want to advance your career. So I want to start by sharing a little bit with you about my experience with how people dress and how I dressed and whether or not that impacted my career. At least at McGill, where I went to law school, there is a lot of emphasis put on preparing you for the types of interviews you're going to get if you work for a big law firm. And so you get prepped a lot on how to prepare your resume, how to prepare for the interviews, and even how to dress. And so, if you're a man, you're going to wear a relatively conservative suit. You want to avoid loud colors like red. You want to prefer colors like blue. And you have similar advice being given to women. And so the way that you would prepare and the way you would look when you go into one of these interviews and the way you would go into one of these jobs is a very specific look. And so if you picture what a corporate lawyer looks like in your head, that is the way that we were kind of taught to think of how you would go into your job. Now, my first job at a law school wasn't at the big law firm. I worked for big law firms during law school. And so I had all the suits, I had all the conservative ties, I had all this stuff. But my first job after law school was not that. My first job at a law school was working for a medium-sized company, about 500 employees. My job in that company was I was an in-house counsel. So I was a lawyer for this company. So day one of going to work in this company, I show up dressed the way I think a lawyer should be dressed. And I got to tell you, I don't think I've ever felt more awkward in my entire life. To give you an idea, the president and CEO of this company was a guy who came to work in work boots, jeans, a ratty t-shirt, and suspenders. He would spend some of his time doing CEO type stuff, but he would also spend a lot of his time in the shipyard doing manual labor. And so when that is the tone that's being set by the president of the company, you can imagine that the dress code in that company does not really cater to someone who's wearing a three-piece suit and a tie. For anyone who is working in a job which faced customers, khaki slacks, and a polo shirt. And that was about as formal as this company got. And so imagine how I felt walking in there as the, young kid who's just coming into this new job wearing a suit and tie. It just didn't feel good. And so the traditional advice of, dress more formally, you can definitely take that overboard. So there is some research from the Harvard Business School that will indicate that the way that you dress impacts the way that people perceive you, but not exactly in the way that you might think. So this study that was done by these Harvard researchers essentially asked students to evaluate just based on physical appearance how they perceived college professors, a topic I know a little something about. And so they showed them two different male professors, one of whom was kind of clean-shaven, clean-cut, wearing sort of very formal attire, and the other one was more scruffy-looking, had on maybe jeans and a t-shirt, basically looked a lot more casual, not really like what you would expect from a professor. And there was a very clear difference in how students perceived the competence of these people, but probably not in the way you think, because they evaluated the scruffier-looking professor as being more competent, which seems awkward and counterintuitive, but there's a twist here. And that twist is the only reason that scruffy and more casual-looking professor was evaluated as being more competent was in scenarios where the students or the subjects of the study were specifically told that this person taught at a well-known, highly credentialed school. And so the thing that made people perceive this person as more competent wasn't actually the way that they presented themselves or the way they dressed. It was the fact that they bucked the idea of what they had in their mind as someone who taught at an institution like that. So in other words, it was the non-conformity of the person with the expectations is what led people to believe that they were more competent at their job. If I had to kind of put a thought process behind this, the idea is if this person can get away dressing like this, they must be really good at their job. That's kind of the subconscious thought process that was going through people's minds. And so the way someone dressed meant that they were, someone who dressed more casually was being perceived as more competent. Does this mean that you should dress like a slob and that's going to make people think you're better at your job? Probably not. So let's keep going with the research and let's see what else this research has to say. There's another study on this topic by Temple University that found that the way that you dress has a direct impact on your job performance. And the way that it has that impact on your job performance is because when you dress a certain way, you can potentially increase your self-esteem, increase your confidence. And it is a well-known fact that if you feel better, if you feel more confident, you generally tend to perform better. And so the way that people dressed, when people dressed in a way that made them feel more confident, this allowed them to perform better at work. Generally speaking, the more formally people dress, the more confident they feel. But that's not a rule across the board. If you think back to my story about my first job and the fact that, I was the only one there wearing a suit, whereas everyone else was kind of wearing jeans or khakis and a polo shirt, dressing more formally did not increase my confidence. If anything, it made me feel insecure. And so how you dress, increasing your confidence, is going to change depending on the situation. There's also a couple of studies that are relatively similar that have been reported in Psychology Today and in the Journal of Consumer Research that shows that people who dress better tend to communicate more clearly and tend to pay more attention to detail in the work that they're doing, both of which contribute to improved performance in a person's job. Now, the one piece of research that I have not been able to find, though, is any research that suggests that the more formally you dress, the better your career prospects are going to be. So the research that I've just talked about kind of goes along with that idea, but it doesn't necessarily create that one-to-one correlation between more formal equals better career success. So what does this all mean? How do we actually apply this in practice? Well, really, there's three main tips that we can take out of this research. And the first is that you need to make sure that the way that you're dressing is tailored to the environment that you're going to be operating in. You need to make sure that the way you dress allows you to feel like you're an accepted part of the community. So if you work in a place where the general attire is going to be more formal, dressing more formally so that you feel like you are part of the crowd is going to be something that helps your self-esteem and helps your individual performance. If on the flip side, you work in a company where the dress code is super casual and you've got people coming into work in Bermuda shorts and sandals and you show up in a suit, you're going to feel like the odd man out, and then you are not going to perform as well because you'll feel awkward, you'll feel like an outsider, and that will negatively impact your performance. So what you want to do is you want to figure out what the dress code is, what the culture is expecting, and you want to tailor your approach to that code. The second tip that we can take from all of this is that you need to feel comfortable wearing what you're wearing. A huge amount of the benefit that comes from dressing up, impacting performance and improving your career prospects has to do with improving your self-confidence. If you feel uncomfortable in what you're wearing, you are not going to be improving your self-confidence. So even in a world where, you are dressing up more formally, you're wearing the suit and tie, if you're not the type of person who feels comfortable in those types of clothes, you're not actually going to get any benefit from dressing that way because it's not actually going to help your confidence. So going back to tip number one, in terms of understanding the culture, what you want to do is you want to kind of figure out what the baseline level of expectation is for people who dress in this organization. You want to kind of figure out what the limits are, right? How far can you push it towards the more formal? How far can you push it towards the more casual? Still feel like you are not sticking out like a sore thumb, still feel accepted, and then based on your personal preference, figure out where you fall in that spectrum. If you're the type of person who gets a big confidence boost out of dressing up, figure out what the upper limit of formality is for the organization that you're in and push it that way. If you're the type of person who feels best about themselves when they're dressed down and feeling more casual, figure out what you can get away with so that you're not sticking out too much from the average, and go with that kind of look. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that you feel comfortable in your own skin because that's going to be what gives you the confidence to perform better at your job. And the other tip that we can take from this is that you want to make sure that you are using your appearance as an opportunity to show off your individual personality, to stand out from the crowd a little bit, to create, your quote unquote personal brand. So take this opportunity, use your clothes, use your appearance, use it as a way to really stick out a little bit. You don't necessarily need to be a corporate drone and look like everyone else. You need to find a way that you can fit in with the general culture, but also be unique, be yourself, And that's going to be the thing that allows people to help you stand out from the crowd, that helps them perceive you as being someone different. So when it comes time for that promotion, for, that opportunity on this other project that you really wanted to work on, it's not necessarily going to be about your clothes, but it's going to be about the fact that you are someone unique, someone individual who brings their own skills and talents to the table, and the way you present yourself is going to be part of that. Now, for me personally, this has been a little bit of a struggle throughout my entire career, because I always wanted to believe that my personal appearance, my physical appearance, didn't actually matter in terms of, the way I was perceived at work. And, I thought my work should speak for itself. But the reality of it is that we all judge people based on appearance, and we all have this in the back of our minds. And whether I was doing it consciously or not, I have done things to present myself in certain ways that have helped my career. So for example, when I was earlier in my career and I had certain positions where I was responsible for managing people, many of whom were older than me, and where I needed to be taken more seriously, I grew out a beard and I dressed more formally just to make myself look older. Did I do it on purpose? I don't think so. I don't think I ever consciously thought that, but definitely it was probably somewhere subconscious in the back of my mind. As I got a little bit older, as the gray started coming into my beard, I didn't need to look as older. I started to dress a lot more casually, and that just sort of became part of my personality, part of who I was. It's also something that you'll realize that as you go through your career, you don't need to worry so much about how you're perceived, and you can start to really build your own personal image and your own personal brand, and it becomes a lot more about you being unique as opposed to conforming to what other people should expect. But regardless of whether it is something that you're doing consciously or unconsciously, or whether you think it's right or wrong, the reality is the appearance that we project to other people does have an impact on the work that we're doing, whether it's true or perceived, but it definitely is going to have an impact on your career prospects. So now that you know how you should be dressing for your next job, you might want to take a look at this video to actually show you how you could go about getting that job. And make sure to subscribe to the channel for other videos about skills that you probably should have learned in school but didn't.